Mad Donna stared up at a vast curving cloud approaching her as she tramped across the white wastes. Twinkling stars strung its upper reaches and hung down like looping garlands across black lightning bolts, frozen in the act of splitting the smooth face asunder. Cliff wall, her mouth felt dry at the prospect. Or maybe it was the dehydrating salts of the white wastes. It was hard to be sure. The road from Glory Hole was high up to the left from this perspective, climbing a succession of ruined buildings and fallen roadways along the dome wall to come up level with the cliff top. The right-hand end of the cliff top road led out of the white wastes and into the ominous looming halls. A ratskin had once told her there were evil spirits there, and truly the rows of towering machinery rusted into solid heaps but not yet completely quiescent were disturbing. The chalk-piled dust of the wastes gave way grudgingly to cracked slabs in a pipe-choked channel near the base of the cliff. Donna went cautiously, testing each step before advancing. The finest dust from the white wastes could flow like water and would often pool in pits or crevices on its periphery. Usually this was just inconvenient and meant stumbling in unseen potholes. But the base of cliff wall was rife with cracks deep enough to swallow a man or woman whole. Even a solid-looking slab or pipe might be resting at the edge of an unseen precipice and just waiting to tumble an unwary traveler to their doom. She stopped, squinting between the pipes and trying to see what had caught her attention. There, a scatter of small bones and chitin. She reappraised the thick tangle of fallen wires hanging above the spot. Tiny, subtle movements made it look like the wires were swaying in a breeze, but there was no breeze to be felt. Wireweed. Doubtless a chunk had fallen from a tolm root at the top and survived down here by catching rats and spiders. Donna counted herself lucky. Larger thickets would have hidden the evidence of their kills better. The first inkling she might have had about the weed would be when it was looping tendrils around her pretty neck. She had heard stories of wireweed that had learned to lurk under dust or sand, or even behind walls, and burst out on its prey from hiding. Suddenly the floor of the channel seemed a less safe place to be. She went up, climbing creaking pipes and corroded stanchions, steering well clear of the weed she had spotted. Now that she was alert to it, she spotted a few other clumps dotted around. Nasty as it was, wireweed was a lurker, and as such it was a fair bet that it would be lurking near well-used trails. The weed patches seemed to be spread evenly around a bank of 6-meter-high outflow pipes, and that would make it likely that they connected to the turbine chambers beneath cliff wall. By the time she got level with the outflow, she was dripping with sweat, and the jagged metal she'd climbed had torn her gloves. She clung to a section of gantry and eyed the rock-reed apron in front of the pipes dubiously as she caught her breath. There was no sign of what she'd expected to find, the fine gray sensor hair sticking out of cracks and crevices that denoted the presence of lashworms. It was easy to see why. Every crack or crevice around the outflow pipes had been meticulously broken open, and there was obscene rat graffiti everywhere. Looked like rats had eaten all the lashworms. Donna hated rats. She started contemplating other directions to try instead of the outflow. A lasbolt whipped past her face without warning, close enough for her to feel the furnace breath of its passage. The bolt struck sparks of molten steel from the metal gantry, and the whole thing suddenly shifted beneath her. Most people get shot in situations like this because their immediate response is to stop and look around for who's shooting at them. If they were really lucky, they'd get to see their attacker just in time to get themselves killed dead. Gang fighters, especially ones of Donna's caliber, knew better. Cover first, then worry about who's shooting. The decision isn't a decision at all, it's an instant response in a world where death is only ever a trigger pull away. Donna pitched herself over onto the rock-reed apron. A second bolt clipped shards off the edge as she wiggled over it. The gantry swayed alarmingly as her weight left it for firmer ground. Donna lay flat for a moment and glared around wildly. No shapes moved in the outflow tunnels, and no more shots came from above. Whoever was shooting at her was below at the base of the cliff, The practical solution would be to get going before they decided to start lobbing frag grenades up at her, but Donna was consumed with curiosity. She slithered along the edge for a few meters and slipped out a specially polished throwing blade she kept tucked in her boot. Easing it over the edge allowed her to see a view down the wall with the blade's mirrored surface, which her assailants were unlikely to spot in the dim light. Donna had often considered getting some kind of remote for her bionic eye for times like this, but Tessera, her old mentor, had been derisive. "A gadget will always fail you, she had sneered. "Only rely on things that can't go wrong." She had accepted only grudgingly that Donna needed to replace her eye at all. There, a figure with a shouldered rifle. It was scanning around the outflow area. She shrank back in case the figure had a scope sight. He had been standing on a slab close to where Donna had started to climb, with another figure just behind it, a darker blur in the gloom. She edged along a little further and put her little blade over the edge to see if there were more of them. She caught sight of movement and turned the blade to catch a small group of maybe 3 or 4 marching up to the slab, obviously allies of the sniper. The figure at the head of the group looked to be dressed in white clothes or armor, and the rest were shadowy blobs that looked like they were cloaked and hooded. The figure in white dashed a rifle out of the sniper's hands, and some kind of argument broke out, fragments of angry imprecations floating up the wall from below. Donna smiled nastily. They wanted her alive, so they were bounty hunters. Not Shala and Kelbach, but some other posse, fresh out of Glory Hole no doubt. All attention was being drawn to the argument, so Donna risked poking her head over for a better look. The figure in white, armor she realized, a full-body suit of shaped ceramite pieces by the look of it, stood with his legs spread pointing down imperiously at the fallen Lost rifle. Skulking just in front of it was an Underhive gun scummer, the kind of trash for hire you can find buzzing like flies around any of the settlements. It looked like he had a gun scum buddy hovering between backing him up and slinking away. The 2 remaining members of the group looked rather, well, weird. They were heavily cloaked in dark robes, but that couldn't disguise the fact that one was short and round, the other tall and rail-thin. The tall one scarcely moved at all, and the short one seemed to be constantly swaying, as if in time to unheard music. Neither carried any visible weapons. Things were hotting up on the slab. The scummer was shaking his head, and White Harmer kept jabbing his finger at the last rifle again and again. The scummer looked surly, his hand flexing closer to his holster. Just when it looked like violence would erupt at any moment, another figure moved fluidly into view. It was low and lean like a hunting hound, all polished chrome and brushed steel. It was, in fact, an enforcer hound. A standard enforcer cyborg, occasionally seen in the Underhive, indentured to guilders, watchmen, or bounty hunters. The fire went out of the scummer as soon as he saw the mastiff, and he hastily picked up the rifle. Donna cursed inwardly and wished she had a few frag grenades to drop on them. It was too far for a decent pistol shot, and trying would get her in a gun battle with men with rifles, a definably bad idea. The thought gave her another idea, however, and after some searching she found a hand's breadth section of pipe that would serve her purpose. Coming to a crouch at the edge, she popped up for a second, fully exposed to those below. One of the cloaked figures, the short one, seemed to sense her first and pointed. The others were caught flat-footed, clumsily swinging around to look for their forgotten prey. "Eat frag, you scummers!" Donna yelled, and threw the pipe into their midst before ducking out of sight. Alarmed yells could be heard, and Donna imagined them all diving for cover from the so-called frag grenade she had thrown. As she entered the outflow pipe, she heard the first screams floating up from below as the wire weed feasted on its unexpected bounty. She smiled, a full, cruel smile. The first couple of 100 meters of pipe ran straight, and then it went through a slow left corkscrew and rose perhaps 10 meters before debouching into a large chamber. That was where Donna found the rats. 24 pairs of glinting, narrowed eyes were studying her as she exited the pipe. As 4 sets of eyes moved closer, Her bionics saw their long, sinuous forms sidling insouciantly to surround her, their worm tails dragging in the dirt. She stood her ground. Running or even backing off now would most likely bring the whole pack down on her in an instant. Necromundan giant rats were the stuff of nightmares, over a meter long with scabrous, oily pelts, naked worm-like tails, taloned claws, piercing red eyes that glitter with malign intelligence, and a jaw full of jagged, disease-ridden fangs. Mutations are so common, it's unusual to see a rat without bloated tumors, or 2 heads, or poisonous spines, or drooling acidic green foam. They'd long since learned not to fear humans. And there are many parts of the Underhive that belong more to rats than men. Donna thumbed 71 to life and menaced them with it, the malicious whine of its whirling teeth oscillating as she swung it in a casual figure of 8. "You want some, boys? Want a little rat fricassee? Come on. Donna's waiting, and she doesn't have all day." The rats stopped when they heard 71's keening challenge, but hunger, or maybe her talking back, needled them into advancing again. One skeletal specimen with bony horns on its head hunched its shoulders to jump, but Donna burned it down with her last pistol as it sprang. The distraction gave the other 3 the opening they wanted, prompting 2 of them to leap at her face while the 3rd went for her belly. Her chain blade whipping up in a tight arc, Donna took the head off one rat in a spray of gore and gouged bloody chunks from the other, making it squeal as it was hurled aside. Donna spun with the momentum, twisting desperately to avoid the slavering fangs of the 3rd as its leap carried it past. The wounded one landed near her feet and snapped furiously at her, but she kicked it away, leveling her pistol and popping off a shot at the one she dodged as it tensed to jump again. The rat skittered away from the last shot with almost preternatural speed, and then started to slowly edge away, chittering and glaring at her menacingly. Donna stood poised, her heart hammering in her chest. She had passed the test for the present. The other rats began preening disinterestedly, or nosed around, pointedly ignoring her. Several of them ambled casually after the wounded one, lapping at the crimson trail it left as it desperately tried to crawl away. Others trotted over to the rats she had killed and started gnawing on them with shameless cannibalistic gusto. Donna strode forward through the chamber, displaying more confidence than she felt, boot heels scrunching on scattered bones. 2 large square tunnels were visible in the far wall, so she headed towards them, trying to cover every angle at once and not ran. As she got closer, she could see more rats watching her from the left tunnel, and steered to the right. The rats might be trying to trick her by sending her deeper into their nest, but it was unlikely. Having tested her mettle, they would be content to follow her now, waiting until she was hurt by something else, sleeping or off guard before they came for her again, or as the burst of agonized squeaking behind her underlined. They would finish off anything else that crossed her path but limped away from the encounter. Rats were nothing if not supreme opportunists. For now, her only hope was to push on and stay ahead of the bounty hunters. They were the real peril. The tunnel was streaked with crusted patches of old slime, and little puddles of moisture winked up at her from the floor. These were good signs that the route connected to the dank turbine chambers. Sure enough, after 20 meters, the tunnel ended at a set of corroded, gap-toothed rungs set into the wall. Looking up, Donna could see a tangle of rusted metal partially blocking the lip of a shaft perhaps 3 meters above. There was an old Underhive adage that said, "Never trust a rang when you can make the jump." But then another stated, "Never make a jump when you can make the climb." Donna opted for the former this time. She backed up a couple of paces, turned to blow a kiss to the glittering rat eyes in the shadows behind, sheathed her weapons, and leapt. She caught at the lip of the shaft with both hands, but her torn gloves made her hands slip, and one skidded off. Flailing around, she caught the topmost rung and it tore straight out of the crumbling ferrocrete. Disgusted, she tossed it away and made another grab at the lip. This time her grip held, and with some unladylike grants and scrabbling she hauled herself over the edge. As she did so, the pile of rusting scrap creaked ominously. A twisted turbine blade was dislodged and spun lazily down the shaft with a horrendous clattering noise. She gingerly wormed out from under the mass of machinery as it teetered further and settled towards the edge. Donna held her breath. An instant later, the rest of the scrap avalanched down the shaft with a drawn-out screeching and crashing fit to wake the dead. Donna got up and ran from the spot before anything turned up to find out what all the noise was about. Perhaps 100 meters away, Mad Donna ducked down beside the rusting carcass of another turbine mounting and caught her breath. She was in a broad court studded with the things, and wide archways in all directions gave way onto similar chambers. It had once been an orderly place, with the machines set out in precise rows like soldiers on parade. The ranks were now all but obliterated by chunks of masonry that had fallen from the ceiling, and the floor was scattered with unidentifiable machine guts. Stray slivers of light illuminated chambers far into the distance, indicating to her just how deep the giant cracks in the surface of cliff wall truly went. Donna set her back to the direction the tunnel had taken into the shaft below. She hoped that would at least take her vaguely in the direction she needed to go. She started to pick her way through the rows of machines, noting that she had picked up another pair of rats for company. Or was it the same ones from before? It was hard to be sure. She kept her ears sharp for the flutter of carrion bats or ripperjacks as she moved, but all was quiet. Perhaps the noise had frightened them off for the time being. Hours later, it had become apparent to Donna that the biggest threats in the turbine chambers were hunger and thirst. She had come down several dead-end rows and had to backtrack so many times that she was afraid of getting hopelessly lost. But when she used a thermal view to check her own trail, it confirmed she was moving ever deeper in. Apart from the rats, she had seen nothing living in all that time, and the chambers seemed to stretch for miles. A few hours more and Donna was starting to get seriously worried. Even if she could find a way out of there, at this rate she would arrive in Dust Falls to find the bounty hunters already waiting for her. No, she told herself as she strove to quell her frustration. That was just paranoia. Plodding through the endless ranks was getting to her. There had to be some better way to find a clear path, some clue she had missed before now. She gazed intently around her, willing a solution to appear. Looking down, she saw a telltale gleam of reflected moisture beneath some scrap. She bent closer. Great black sludge was seeping out of a crack in the floor. She followed the crack back several rows until it disappeared under a machine, and from there she could see a glistening rivulet of the stuff, wending its way between rubble piles. Donna followed it, and after only a couple 100 meters came out from between two crashed rows of machines into a relatively open space, where the floor sloped up at an abrupt angle. Mad Donna breathed out a gusty sigh of relief and almost choked when she breathed in again. A bitter, noxious stench was wafting down the slope and warring with her nose and throat, threatening to make her cough or puke, or both. She quickly looped a scarf around her face and trusted its carbon-impregnated weave, well, soot-smeared anyway, to filter out the worst of it. It helped a lot, and she scrambled up the slope on her hands and knees without any trouble, scuttling crabwise to avoid several cracks dribbling thick sludge on the way. The top of the slope opened out onto the wide, ugly vista of the sludge pits. Narrow rock-reed piers stretched out in a grid pattern, delineating dozens of steep-sided cisterns. Some of the cisterns were cracked and dry, others were full to the bubbling brim and slopping obscenely over the sides. Patches of slime, algae, and fungus dabbed spots of lurid color here and there, casting sickly, dim phosphorescence over the scene. Many of the piers were shattered, or at least slick, treacherous, and crumbling, and by now Donna expected nothing less. One slip could mean either a bone-making fall into a dry cistern or a slow drowning in a full one, depending on how corrosive the sludge was. The latter could be infinitely more agonizing. Donna looked back down the slope. Rat eyes glittered up at her from between the rusting machines at the bottom. Donna cursed at them dispassionately. She was tired and could use some rest before tackling the pits. but staying up here would mean slowly choking to death, and going down among the machines would mean no rest at all. With a weary sigh, she wandered along the edge to find a row of intact-looking piers she might traverse. Rumor had it that the far end of the sludge pits led to the bottom of the lesser trunk, and thence to Dust Falls. She turned and stepped out onto the piers. Having come this far, she had to believe that rumor was true. A route, avoiding the most cracked piers, perforce took her beside or between the fuller cisterns. As she made her way further out, she found very few of the cisterns were actually empty except along the edge. Most had at least 3 meters of foul-smelling glop in the bottom, usually bubbling flatulently or swirling in slow, rancid eddies. She steered well away from anywhere the sludge was seeping over and crossed no crack that was bigger than a long step. While looking back to see how far she had come, Donna caught sight of low, lean shapes slinking along the piers after her. At least the rats still had their hopes up. Donna slogged on through the dizzying stench and concentrated on keeping her feet from straying. Her knees were starting to feel uncomfortably weak when she reached yet another intersection between the piers, with 4 especially full and eye-wateringly foul pits. Donna looked around at her choices and glanced back to check on her rodent companions, noting interestedly that they were nowhere to be seen. That was her first warning. She heard a soft plop behind her, like a particularly large bubble rising to the surface of the sludge. That was her second warning. Something gelatinous writhed around her ankle. She whipped her foot away in revulsion and whirled about. A nest of translucent, questing tendrils was reaching blindly out of the sludge at her. She almost backed right off the pier, her arms flailing and heels skittering on nothing at its edge. Another plop announced the emergence of a similar horror behind her. Crouching to regain her balance, Donna whipped out 71 and slashed around her desperately, shuddering every time the spinning teeth tore through soft, yielding flesh. A severed tendril flopped against her arm, and its very contact raised welts on the skin and instantly made the limb go numb. Donna threw caution to the wind and ran along the pier to escape, and in doing so she missed seeing the third attacker until it was too late. Tendrils lashed at her face, catching in her hair as she ducked away. She was brutally dragged down to the pier and almost over the edge, her face numbing as tendrils brushed against it. She couldn't see, her sword arm felt like a solid lump of ceramite, and the grip on her long dreadlocks tenaciously dragged her towards the viscid sludge. In desperation, she ripped out her plasma pistol, pointed it over the edge and pulled the trigger. There was a heart-stopping fraction of a second delay, and then a tiny part of the sun touched the sludge pits. Raw sludge flashed into geysers of superheated steam, where it struck and flames raced away over the surface. In seconds, the flames had reached the limits of the cistern and lapped hungrily at its edges. Whatever had a hold of Donna let go, and she crawled away along the pier with her sight dimming from the potent toxins in her face and arm. She could sense light and heat from the burning cistern. She could also feel it becoming more intense as the fire spread. Thick, choking smoke billowed around her, filling her lungs until it felt like they were coated with black soot. She crawled on, dragging her paralyzed arm, with 71 dangling uselessly from it. For a terrifying eternity, her world shrank to encompass only the rough surface of the pier and her inching painfully along it. About a couple of millennia later, she felt herself tumbling over an incline. By that time, all Donna could do was flail feebly as she rolled over. She hit bottom and blacked out. The rats, their patience rewarded at last, trotted down to the supine form at the bottom of the slope. Jaws twitched and drooled at the prospect of sinking fangs into firm, white flesh. Donna lay paralyzed and could do nothing as the pack closed in around her. They were led by a scorched and blackened skeletal horror with bony horns on its head. With malicious deliberation, they started gnawing on her arm and face. Rats. Donna's first conscious thought brought her sharply awake. She started up violently and fell back down coughing and retching. A burning sensation like pins and needles times a million coursed through her arm and face. She cursed and slapped at them to get the circulation going while she glared around for her tormentors. Outside of her fever dream, there were no rats to be seen, just a bare incline behind her that led up to the sludge pits. She must have crawled to the edge and rolled down before losing consciousness. Donna had no way to know how long she had been out, but the air was acrid with smoke, and she could make out wavering patches of orange illumination smearing the clouds at the top of the slope. That indicated some of the pits were still burning. Presumably not too much time had passed. She picked herself up more cautiously this time and bent slowly to scoop up 71 and her plasma pistol from where they had fallen. The pig was down to a quarter charge. She must have pulled back on the trigger way too hard back there. She was lucky it hadn't overheated and taken her hand off. Whatever horror was in the sludge had either burned on the surface or had been driven to the bottom. Donna would wager good credit on the fact it couldn't come after her or she would already be dead. She limped slowly away from the pits, her arm and face burning, every part of her body feeling scraped and bruised. She wanted nothing more than to lie down and rest, but instead she kept going and made a mental note to shoot the next rat she saw for all the trouble the little frickers were causing. There had been no revenge killings on her part by the time she reached the back wall. The air was a little cleaner here, but not much as the fires were still burning. Blinking through the smoky haze, Donna felt a moment of heart-crashing defeat as she saw the wall was unbroken along its entire length. There was no way through. The stories were wrong, and she was as good as dead. She shook her head to get a grip on the gibbering panic that was rising inside her and looked again, paying more attention to the smoke. It was definitely swirling away from the wall in some places. The fires were drawing air into the pits from an adjacent space, and if air could move, there was presumably a way through. She found an old service crawlway after a dozen steps, but it was mostly blocked off by debris, so she kept looking. She found an identical crawl space 10 steps further along and hauled herself into it. It was a tight squeeze, making her wonder just how big maintenance workers had been back then. Donna didn't really care, as the cleaner air was sweet, and most important of all, a way out of the thrice-damned sludge pits. Donna dropped out of the crawlway and into the generator dome. Her legs were shaking with exhaustion, but she was so far from being in a safe place to rest, it wasn't even funny. After the pits, the generator dome seemed majestic and cathedral-like. Building-sized reactor stacks reached upward before splitting into branched conduits like so many giant candelabra, their sweeping ironwork arches lit by beams of sodium yellow light as they ran off out of sight hundreds of meters above. As I looked around, dark specks floated through the saffron shafts like so many dust motes, probably flocks of carrion bats out looking for a meal. At least some of the generators were still working. Donna could feel vibration through the floor and see the occasional jewel-like blinking among the branches. It was frustrating to be in the presence of so much coursing energy and be unable to use it. But Donna stuck to the dome wall for good reason. In ages past, there had been a time of crisis above, as desperate power shortages plagued the ever-growing Hive city. Desperate decisions had been made and some heroic team of engineers had descended to the old Generatoria dome to reactivate as many generators as possible. It was a Herculean effort marred by frequent accidents, and under her scavarades making off with equipment, tools, and materials at any opportunity. At the end of it all, the techs had left an enduring gesture to their hosts by rigging the casings of the reactors and just about anything else nearby so that they ran with live power. Donna could see that each stack was surrounded by its own drift of burned scraps and blackened bones left by overambitious power tappers, incautious vermin, and ignorant greenhivers. She tried to stay off any areas of metal, whether it be grill-like floor plates, protruding supports, or even just where cracked rockreed exposed its reinforcing internal mesh of rods. When there was metal unavoidably in her path, she threw bits of scrap at it to see if they raised a spark. She was paying such close attention to her feet that she didn't even notice the little holestead in the dome wall until she was almost parallel with it. A narrow door had been crammed into a crack in the wall. a crude thing of scavenged plates welded together. The rubble floor in front of it was beaten flat and devoid of cover for several meters, and there were a couple of slime trenches close to the entry. She was cautious, despite her bone wariness. Since Holsteaders were an ornery bunch, they had to be, to try and make a living beyond the comparative safety of the settlement. As such, they were as likely to shoot at strangers as welcome them, which was not surprising, given most gangers viewed any Holstead as a potential source of income in exchange for their dubious brand of protection. Donna warily approached the door. She drew her last pistol but held it loosely at her side. It was good manners and good sense to show that you were armed and prepared to shoot in the Underhive, if only to show that at least you weren't a liability. Close up, she could see the door was hanging slightly ajar and dark handprints marked the jamb. Not a good sign. She raised her pistol and drew 71 with her other hand, still tingling, damn it, hooking the door fully open with it. A short entryway led straight into the living area. The Holsteaders had widened this part of the crack and dug out sleeping niches, but it was still barely more than a corridor. Plastic sheeting hung down, separating the living area from another half-dug chamber at the back. There was blood everywhere. There were drag stains on the floor, handprints on the wall, and arterial spray patterns looped chaotically about the room. Furniture and belongings had been scattered around in some kind of straggle. Broken plates, a shattered pick, a child's ragdoll that made Donna shudder internally for its owner. Judging by the sleeping niches, at least 4 people had lived here, but there was no sign of any of them. Some horrible tragedy had occurred at this Holstead, and it was all the more mysterious as the door could only be opened from the inside and hadn't been forced, as Donna had first assumed. On the bright side, their fuel rod was still burning. The wan yellow lights glimmered as she moved through the hole, and there was a humming power outlet near the door. Without hesitation, she snapped out the pig's power pack and slotted it into the outlet. Grisly as the place was, it was the closest to safety Donna had seen in a while. She closed the door and locked it before selecting a sleeping niche and dropping into fitful slumber, her pistol at the ready and internal alarm set on a hair trigger. Donna was hours from the Holstead and almost out of the Generatoria dome when she noticed she was being followed. She was watching yet another flock of carrion bats circling over one of the stacks, indicating that they were waiting for something to die. She suddenly sensed movement on the ground. A small group, 3 of 4 figures, moved together and slowly followed the route she had taken. Even at this distance, she could tell they were not gang fighters. They shuffled along too hesitantly and bunched up all the time. The exit from the Generatoria dome was up a series of switchback ramps of compacted rabble. The group trailing her would have her in a tight spot on the ramps. There was no cover and nowhere to go except up or down. Donna decided to hide and get a look at whoever they were from closer up, and then she would decide whether to just let them pass or deal with them. She hunched behind a tumble of fallen rockcrete and waited and waited. An interminable time later, she heard feet scrunching through the dirt, drawing gradually closer. Donna's patience was already shot, and impulsively, she decided to confront them and have done with it. She bounded out behind them, sword and pistol at the ready, and hissed, "Freeze, or you're dead!" The words had barely left her lips before she realized she had made a mistake. They were already dead. 2 men, a woman, and a little girl stood raggedly before her. Donna immediately reckoned that they were the missing Holsteaders. Horrible wounds marked all of them. Torn throats, hanging intestines, flapping skin, glistening bone, missing eyes. They were plague zombies. Even in the Spire, Donna had heard stories of the fearful Neuron plague that periodically swept the hives of Necromunda with a liberal dose of anarchy and chaos. It destroyed the victim's higher mental functions while leaving intact or even intensifying activity in the hindbrain. The result was a creature always hungry for flesh and incapable of feeling pain. Every time the afflicted pulled down another victim, they infected it and added a new member to the ranks. At their peak, the zombie plagues touched even the spire, choking the promenades and boulevards with heaving crowds of restless, ravening dead. Once, in the Underhive, Donna had learned that the plague had never really gone away at all. It just lay dormant in the darkness below and contented itself with taking odd victims here and there until it rose again in full force. Donna felt sick with fear. She had slept in the plague-struck homestead, so she might be infected already. Failing that, the zombies could inflict it with so much as a scratch of their ragged, filth-encrusted claws. She caught sight of the little girl's face, miraculously intact, but with slack, drooling lips and cloudy eyes. Something snapped inside Donna's mind. An old, familiar break that came when some part of her own hindbrain said, "No more." She saw red, and the fight that followed became a stop-mouth flick book of carnage from her perspective. 2 shots as she charged, one body down with limbs flailing. A backhand cut from 71 sliced through the top of a skull like a knife through an egg. Another cut lopped off a reaching claw. A point-blank las shot fired into an empty eye socket. A zombie tripped on its own entrails. A decapitation. Hacking, hacking, hacking at the dead little girl until she finally stopped writhing. Mad Donna came to herself sitting, weeping, with her weapons dangling in her hands. The dismembered bodies of the Holsteaders lay nearby in a pathetic heap. They had barely even had a chance to move from the spot where she had confronted them. Donna drew a shaky hand over her face to wipe away hot tears and stood abruptly. She would check herself for wounds later. Right now, she had to get out of this place. The least she could do was return the Holsteaders the favor of her use of their power outlet and sleeping niche. Sheathing her other weapons and pulling out the pig, she lavished the power she had looted from them on their funeral pyre. Among the noble houses of the Hive spires of Necromunda, the bond of blood is everything. Powerful, avaricious men have schemed and fought quiet but vicious battles on Necromunda for 100 centuries and more to gain ascension to noble status. They know no bond of deed or word will pass the test of generations among themselves. Naked ambition will always prevail. They know no riches can secure men's loyalty either, for what has been bought once can always be bought again. And most of all, they know that nothing can supplant the power of the family, the age-old genetic bond of blood. The responsibility of an offspring to house and to family is taught from the cradle, even from the womb. Maintaining the bloodline means careful breeding, so the ever-spiraling politics of necessity weave a delicate dance through balls, banquets, and engagements to the lofty bedchambers of the noble houses. The myriad social niceties of the spire serve to disguise a sharp-toothed survival instinct. Excerpt from Zonariarius the Younger's Nobilite Pax Imperator. The triumph of aristocracy over democracy. She remembered her mother best of all, breathtakingly beautiful despite 2 centuries of anti-agathics and restorative surgery. Willowy and graceful despite bearing over 24 noble offspring of House Ulanti. She had been a proud and distant goddess, seen only occasionally by Donna and her sisters when they were young, but beloved by all. Each of them aspired to have her stunning looks and queenly presence when they grew up. They all vied for her attention with the pictures, songs, acrobatics, dancing, and recitals they worked feverishly to perfect as her visiting day came closer. As the youngest and the prettiest, Donna had always known that her mother liked her the best. She remembered her and her 11 sisters having their portrait painted by a famed artist with a strange off-world accent. Berfield? She couldn't recall the name now and had been too young to pronounce it properly then. They had spent interminable hours sitting primly in elegant chairs in the great gallery, chafing in their formal gowns, while the artist moved them fractionally back and forth and fussed endlessly over ambient light or composition. It was an especially good memory because it was the last time she remembered all of her sisters being together at the same time. She had complained precociously to the artist that spending hours painting was stupid if you could take a pic in an instant. Instead of being angry, he had stopped fussing for a while to explain to her that the true value of something was in direct proportion to the effort put into it. A pict might have sufficed for any normal hiver, but the noble house of Ulanti deserved better than that. Indeed, it deserved only the best, even if it took a little longer. The artist had made her feel very special, and from then on, she had made an effort not to fidget and to give him her prettiest smile. Then there was the time an Ulanti hunt had returned in triumph from Hive Bottom. At the time, the Underhive was a home to the worst bogeymen and monsters for Donna. Its name was invoked only in spooky stories and dreadful admonishments from harried nursemaids. The very idea that someone would descend from the spire to fight the hideous mutants and outlaws below seemed fantastic to her. The hunters had come up from the wall in procession, showered with blossoms and heralded by clarions every step of the way. Donna had squeezed herself to the front of the crowd of well-wishers that met them on the steps of the Grand Manse to get a good look at the conquering heroes. There were 3 men and a woman, all lesser cousins but now lionized by the household for their bravery in the face of the semi-mythical perils of Underhive. Their off-world hunting rigs were darkly magnificent suits of Baroque armor, each one entirely different to the others. The hulking silvered form of an Oris rig contrasted completely with the spindly obsidian insect limbs of a Malkadon. Another wore a Yeld rig with its glittering bladed wings proudly swept back like a cloak of knives. But the one that had caught her attention the most had been the woman in Jakara armor, with her mirror shield and molecular blade. She was small and lithe, stepping lightly with the easy grace of a predatory cat. She had caught little Don's wide-eyed gaze as she mounted the steps and winked at her, and it seemed as if she was saying, "See? Noble daughters can be just as strong as noble son." They had played spirers and scowies for weeks after the hunt returned, and Donna had always held out to be the Jakara. Her most favorite place in the spire had always been the Arboretum. It was a marvel of a much earlier time, beyond the skill of anyone to recreate in this day and age. The first time she had been taken there, it felt like she was stepping into another world. All her life had been spent among the sterile, high-arched halls of the Ulanti district, where living things were confined in beds and borders, planters and terrace gardens. Many of the plants she had seen were cunning artifices of metal spun to take their form, some so finely made that they grew, blossomed brazen flowers, and then withered away again to rust. The Arboretum was different. Everything there was organic, and the very air itself seemed vibrant because of it. There were towering trees and meadows of long grass, and bushes and thickets of heady scented blossoms, with colorful insects and birds fluttering between them. Semi-wild animals had grazed shyly among the shadowed trunks, and bright-aimed simians leapt joyously between the overhanging boughs. Better than that, the Arboretum formed a great torus over multiple levels of the inner spire. By some great cunning artifice, each quadrant of the torus was at a different point of growth. In one quadrant, the trees had bare, leafless branches, and the ground was covered in white powder like ash, but made up, so she was told, of frozen water vapor. In another, the growth was fresh and green, with new shoots unfolding and baby animals everywhere. In the next, all was ripened and fulsome, lazily dreaming beneath warm sunlight from the skylights above. In the last, the leaves were withering in a fantastic display of reds, oranges, and browns, the fallen ones forming a scrunching carpet everywhere. This changing landscape slowly rotated through the year, each part of the Arboretum undergoing the cycle of death and rebirth. Her tutors had told her that this incredible ecosystem was the way of it on many worlds. There were often seasons which changed the environment completely through the year. Not so in the great hives of mankind, they had said. Here, man had brought nature to heel entirely and was troubled by the seasons not at all. It seemed a great shame to her at the time, and, as she was to find out later, it was not entirely true.